Greetings, Nick with Sweetwater here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a quick look at the very first member of the Friedman Vintage Collection, this 50-watt tonal beast right here, the PLEX. In the world of great tube amp designs and also modifications, Dave Friedman needs no introduction. The PLEX is what Dave refers to as a verbatim sonic twin of his all-time favorite amp, a 1968 Marshall 50-watt Plexi head. In fact, said 50-watt JMP is the very amp that inspired Dave to begin his tone-chasing journey many, many moons ago. But not that many moons ago, because he's a young man. As the playing at the start of this video indicated, I'm going to be joined by my pal Don Carr so he can add his playing talents to show us some of the many tonal options the PLEX has to offer. Then, as icing on the proverbial PLEX cake, we're going to be joined by Dave Friedman via Zoom. To that end, I'm literally going to skim over the features of the amp right now and let Dave do a deeper dive on the cool modern twists he's added to this timeless vintage classic without impacting the all-important authenticity of its inherent tone. Just like the original amp it's based upon, the tube complement of the two-channel PLEX is as follows. Two JJ ECC 83s in the preamp, a long bass JJ ECC 803 phase inverter, and a pair of JJ EL34 power tubes. And if you didn't gather it, all of the tubes are made by, yep, JJ. Let's take a quick tour of the PLEX's front panel, shall we? Going from right to left, we have the following. Two inputs for your guitar. The first one is high sensitivity and the bottom one is low. Take your pick. And if you're thinking, darn it, as there's only two inputs as opposed to the usual four on a Marshall Plexi, that means I can't jump the two channels. Fret not. The PLEX features internal jumpering. This means, my friend, you can blend the two channels without having to rely on one of those pesky little jumper cables like this. You just set the next two controls we're about to talk about to taste, which is pretty darn convenient, and that's your jumpering done. Plus, as you're about to find out from Dave himself in just a few minutes, channel jumping actually works better this way. And that leads us neatly onto the first two control knobs, which are labeled Volume 2 and Volume 1. Volume 1 is for the lead or treble channel, while Volume 2 is for the so-called normal or bass channel. Both have a 3-position bright switch above them. For both switches, the middle position is off. Then, if we compare the other two positions to a fine Indian curry, left is a tikka masala, while right is a madras or even a vindaloo. Chef Friedman will explain in more detail shortly, so stay tuned like I said before. Then we have 4 tone controls: treble, middle, bass, and presence. As I know you know, treble, middle, and bass reside in the preamp section, while presence lives in the power amp. Our last control is another one of those modern twists Dave has added. It's labeled MVC, which, wait for it, is an acronym for Master Volume Control. To be more precise, it's a post-phase inverter master volume, and it's extremely effective. Next up is the power indicator light, then the standby switch, then last but certainly not least, a three-way on-off switch. When this switch is in the middle position, the amp is off. The up position is labeled HV, and the down position, LV. What do HV and LV mean? They don't mean high volume and low volume, but they kind of could. They actually stand for high voltage and low voltage respectively. Yes, my friend, the Plex has a variac mode which is activated whenever the LV position is selected. This not only drops the voltage, but also readjusts the bias accordingly, which is very important. When you change voltage, you need to readjust the bias. Stay tuned for specifics on this fine Edward Van Halen inspired feature from Dave shortly. As for the rear panel, it's merely the modern equivalent of Dave's original 68 Plexi. Namely, the power cable input, then 5 speaker outputs that cover all the usual impedance and cabinet options. As is Mr. Friedman's usual MO, the guts of the Plex are truly a work of art. So, with the help of this handy-dandy screwdriver, let's check them out, shall we? As you can see, the Plex's custom USA made transformers are impressive beasts. And this weighs a lot too. You could do a workout with this, no trouble. Curls, if you will. As for under the hood, it's a USA assembled work of art. Check it out. Show and tell done. I'm going to put the amp back together again and pass the cable over to my partner in crime, Don Carr, so you can hear what this amp sounds like when someone who knows what the hell they're doing is playing it.
Thanks, Nick. One of the classic pairings with this style of amp is a Fender Stratocaster. And so I've got my trusty 87 American Standard here. Now, just for what it's worth, this guitar is a little bit darker sounding than your average Strat. It's kind of the way I like it. It's my guitar. It's my Strat. That's what they do, right? They all have their own personality. Anyway, I'm going to dial through some settings on this amp. The only thing I've got in line is the Echoplex preamp boost. So that's the only thing I'm going to be using, and most of the time it'll be off. We're just going to be hearing the guitar straight into the amp. At this sort of moderate to low gain setting, you can hear the effect of the bright switches a lot better. Let's listen to it a channel at a time, and I'll flip through all 3 positions. Ah, yes, Mr. Friedman, another fine offering. Man, really, really love this amp. Nick, back to you and a Zoom call with Dave. I can't wait to hear what he has to say about it.
So, as promised, folks, we're here with the one, the only, Mr. Dave Friedman, to discuss this fine thing to my left, the first in the Friedman Vintage series, the Plex. So this is based on the amp that really started it all for you, right? Your original 68. Can you tell us a bit about the backstory of that one?
So I acquired that amp in, well, way before I was doing amps, probably around 1989, maybe era.
Right.
A friend of mine from a guitar store called me and said, "Hey, I got this amp here you might want." And I go, "Okay." Tells me what it is. Plexi 50 watt, 68 Marshall, $300.
$300. Wow.
$300.
Wow. Wow.
I got it for $300. And the funny story is, at the time I had an old 20 watt Marshall that Reinhold Bogner had modified that I really loved. And when I got this amp, I said, "Can you do the same mod on this amp as," yes, mod, same mod on this amp as my 20 watt amp? Sure. And he does it. I hated it. It wasn't the same. It wasn't the same amp. I know now why, but wasn't the same thing. And what had happened is at the time, Stevie Fryette put it to stock, lead spec stock. So that's the history.
So it's so you had your modded amp unmodded, basically.
Right, exactly. And he put in a lead spec in it, which I would prefer because of kind of sounds I was going for.
Gotcha.
And it became my favorite amp of all time. So I would run this with a Variac.
Right, and you've actually got the Variac is built within this fine Plex, which you're calling it's the Sonic Twin, aren't you?
It's the Sonic Twin. Not saying it's built exactly the same way. I'm not saying it's the exact same specs because I obviously put in a few little bells and whistles. But it is the Sonic Twin of my original amp. Right,
because on the on-off switch, you've got HV high voltage, LV low voltage. Correct. So, and I'm guessing the Variac thing had something to do with the Mr. EVH, maybe, possibly?
Correct. At the time, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a certain sound, and it does a certain thing. And that's how I always ran my amp. So I never ran it any other way.
Right. So that voltage would be the magical 90 or thereabouts?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's just built into the transformer. And it truly is on the primary of the transformer, so it's truly just like a Variac.
Gotcha. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And we discussed this beforehand, and what a lot of people don't realize is when you drop the voltage, you should probably re-bias the amp accordingly.
And it automatically does that.
Perfect. And the other bells and whistles you have, like, I love the fact that you've just got the two inputs, the high sensitivity, low sensitivity, then you've got the two controls, you know, lead and normal, whatever you want to call them, treble and bass. And a lot of people go, well, I want 4 inputs so I can jump it, but you've jumped it internally.
Correct.
What a concept.
So it's actually a better way to do it than externally jumpering, because externally jumpering, actually, you wind up losing gain.
Yeah.
When you do that. And I'm not going to go into the details of why, but it has to do with the way the resistor inputs are done. And you actually wind up losing gain. This way, you don't lose anything.
Right, and then you can just tweak to taste. And I also love the fact that you've got bright switches on both channels. And in your usual tradition, it's a 3-way switch, the middle is off. Then if you could explain left and right, because they're the same on both channels, right?
Sure. To the right is a 4700 picofarad bright cap, which is the traditional lead spec bright cap. Almost useless if that volume is super low on the amp.
Right.
Pretty much 5 and above is when it's useful. Otherwise, it becomes shrill.
Right.
We also have the opposite direction, left, would be 100 picofarad bright cap. So this is just going to add a little sheen. If you want to use the amp kind of cleaner, it's probably best suited for that.
Gotcha.
So traditionally, you would have the volume 1 with the switch to the right, and volume 2, the bright switch in the center.
Right.
That would mimic a vintage super lead kind of amp. And you can blend at will with that, just like the traditionally you would. But with the other bright switch options, you have a lot of interesting things you can come up with.
Oh, it's fascinating. It really is.
You can, what happens if I switch the big cap on both channels and then blend them?
Yep.
Oh, that's a new sound, never heard before. What happens if you don't use any of it? What happens if you use any combination? What happens if you, like a good one is using a Strat into the volume 2 channel and then just switch the bright cap to taste. And if you're using it cleaner with a Strat, it works really well.
Right. Yeah. No, I've been messing with it.
You get the big Hendrixy, Stevie Ray-ish sort of things out of it.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Well, it makes life easier because you don't have to find one of those pesky little cables either that you can never find when you want one. And then they're broken or they won't fit properly because the angles are weird. Then we have the usual suspects, the bass, middle, treble, and presence. And then we have your other, well, one of your other magical things, the master volume. But it's post-phase invader. Can you explain why this works so well? Because it really does work great.
Yeah, it's a particular post-phase inverter master. It's not the typical ones that you hear or see. Something I stumbled upon that was in some other amp, and I'm like, that's interesting how he did that, and I really liked it. And so I implemented it. It seems to work really, really well. It's really the same sound, like on 10 down to 0. It's not, you're not, maybe you're not moving the speaker the same way as it would on 10, that's going to cause it to react a little differently,
Right.
You're not getting quite maybe, on 10, it might be just a little juicier.
Right.
But overall, I'm sure you played with it. It's the same sound.
Yes, it is.
And I think it works better than almost any post-phase inverter master I've seen.
I would have to agree. I've messed with a lot of master volumes over the years that say they're this, and they don't quite do it. I mean, the other thing you get, obviously, is volume affects your perception of various frequencies.
Absolutely.
Like the mids become more pronounced. You think there's less lows because it's just your ear's different.
Yeah, but a lot of the other post-phase masters, when you turned them down, even seemed like they almost scooped the mids a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the bottom end was too loose, and the high end was too bright. And this one doesn't seem to do any of that.
Right. No, it works really, really well. So, which is great. Like, as you say in the manual, why would you do that? The answer is sometimes you have to. You're playing a gig where they'll tell you to turn down or get off the stage. And if you've got neighbors or a wife that wants to sleep, then this is her best friend or their best friend, and it stops people calling the police, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Which is a good thing. Then last but by no means least, in true Friedman tradition, you've done something, you're famous for your transparent buffered loops. This one has no loop whatsoever. I know why you didn't do that. Could you explain to those listening going, you should have put it in?
Well, sure. It just simply doesn't work right. So if you're if you're using this amp distorted, which I think the vast majority of people that are buying this are going to crank it, and that's what they're going to do with it. They're going to use it for a distorted, rock tone. And how that's achieved in the amplifier is you're distorting the phase inverter of the amplifier first, and then later you distort the power section some more. And so if you put a loop before the phase inverter tube, and all your distortion is coming from the phase inverter tube, I look at it like this. Will it sound good if you put a Boss DS1 pedal after your delay in a loop of an amp?
Enough said.
I think enough said, right? Because that's essentially what you're going to get.
Right.
You're better off at that point, and with this kind of amp, just using the effects in front and or doing a different sort of scenario, maybe a wet dry thing with a line out,
right.
or there's other things like fry-at power stations where it can add a loop because you're loading the amp down and you have a loop in it.
Right.
There's all sorts of things that, you could do. And a lot of people that are buying this kind of amp know that. Although when we first announced it, they were asking those questions. Why no loop? Because you can't.
Right. Well, you can, but it would suck. I think that's a technical term.
You're not going to like it. Yeah.
It's there. You won't use it, but it's there. Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's why and I do believe, unless it's some particular amp, any amp I'm going to do in the vintage line probably will not have a loop.
Right. Any clues?
I don't know every amp I'm going to do in the vintage line yet.
Right.
There might be an exception if it's a certain style of amp, but probably not.
Right. And I guess my last question would be the one you've already kind of preemptively struck, which was, any idea what's coming next in this line? Because it's pretty exciting. Or is that something you'd have to tell me, then kill me?
I think I've already mentioned it before, and it's kind of out there already, that there's going to be an AC style amp that's next. So I think I could say that.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, on that note, Dave, thank you so much for number one, take the time. Number two, making another fine amp with no effects loop because it doesn't work. And I look forward to the AC and talking to you very soon.
All right. That sounds great.
Killer. Thanks, my friend. Take care.
Right. Excellent. All right.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And there you have it. Words of wisdom from the man behind the Plex amp, Mr. Dave Friedman. Thanks, Dave. As you've hopefully learned and heard, this amp is a tonal monster that sounds and feels great. Also, despite its seeming simplicity, it can produce a veritable plethora of desirable tones. You just got to tweak and use your ears. Just so you're aware, the cab we've been using, this one right here, is a Friedman BE412 loaded with 4 Celestion greenbacks and 2 Celestion vintage 30s. As for the pedals I've been stomping on, I used the Tube Screamer for some of the heavier stuff, and I also used an MXR EP101 Echoplex preamp on some of the lead stuff, and a few other things too. And when you did hear delay, which wasn't very often, it was my trusty UAFX Orion tape echo pedal. For more information on the Plex or any other fine Friedman product, please go to sweetwater.com, or better still, call your always friendly sales engineer and he or she will be only too happy to help you further. Thanks for watching. I'm out. Goodbye.